The computer security world is scrambling after the revelation of a very different bug that many say has dangerous potential. It's called the bash bug, or Shellshock, a tiny flaw in a simple program used in a vast array of devices that allows a hacker to take control. The CBC's Ron Charles has more.
The latest security warning to computer users sounds particularly dire. A 10 out of 10 on the risk scale of the U.S. Homeland Security Department's Computer Emergency Readiness Team. A vulnerability that could allow hackers to easily take control of many web servers and Apple computers. It's called the bash bug, named after the part of the Unix operating system at the center of the problem. Cybersecurity expert Claudiu Popa has already set up a website about it.
So the average users have to be concerned. But even non-Apple users who have devices that are internet connected or are somehow remotely manageable need to worry about this.
By remotely manageable devices, he means those thermostats and light bulbs that are controlled by smartphones. Even internet routers and webcams can potentially be taken over by hackers because many of them use bash. Already, some experts are calling the bash bug more dangerous than April's Heartbleed bug. That bug, involving a different part of Unix, exposed dozens of popular websites to major security breaches. It allowed a hacker to allegedly access hundreds of social insurance numbers on Canada Revenue Agency computers. What experts find more frightening than that is the potential for hackers to not just look at what's on a computer, but also take control of the machine.
Anything goes once you're inside those computers. The most concerning thing that can happen as a result is for your data to be modified or to be corrupted without your knowledge.
He expects companies to release a flood of software updates over the next few days to address the bug. Right now, several security websites offer a test you can cut and paste into your Apple computer's terminal program. If you get this result, well, that's not good. Ron Charles, CBC News, Toronto.
Computer security experts warn this so-called bash computer bug could be an extremely dangerous one. In fact, they say it could be as bad or worse than the Heartbleed bug, which surfaced back in April. So also known as Shellshock, the bash bug threatens computers using Unix-based operating systems like Linux or Mac OS X. Bash is the software used to control the command prompt on many computers. Apparently, a weakness in it can be exploited by hackers to take complete control of the machines. For more on all of this, we are joined by Claudiu Popa. He is a risk advisor for VerifyNow.ca, a business platform that provides risk and reputation management services. Thanks for coming in again.
Thanks for having me.
And we spoke about the Heartbleed bug before, so now let's talk about this bash bug. I mean, are there similarities? What are we looking at here?
Absolutely, there are. It's running on the same platform. It uses Unix, Linux type commands. It uses that platform, that operating system. It's not associated with the Windows world, but it has affected some pretty big name devices out there, namely Apple. But it is harder to detect than Heartbleed was, and so it's a problem.
Why is it harder to detect? I mean, how would you detect something like this?
So Heartbleed vulnerabilities were detectable by simply pinging the website and polling it and throwing information at it. In this case, the devices that are vulnerable to this serious issue are on the other side of the firewall, so they're protected by the firewall. So if I wanted to inventory all the vulnerable sites out there on the internet, I wouldn't be able to do it without bypassing firewalls, therefore breaking in. And guess who has the advantage? The criminal element that has already broken in, the criminal element that already has unauthorized access into many companies without having been detected. All they have to do is turn around and exploit this vulnerability today.
This bash bug. I mean, is it the first legitimate attack on Apple products, would you say?
It's not an attack yet. It will be in the next 24 hours or so, because that criminal element is working very hard today to turn it into a worm or a Trojan horse or a virus that will replicate by itself, and no doubt it will target the Apple platform.
So right now, as a bug, what does it do?
As a bug, you're a sitting duck. So organizations that are using it without knowledge, or perhaps with knowledge but a patch is not available, they're basically vulnerable to anyone that comes along and throws the right information at this device that is running bash. And if it's running a vulnerable version of bash, well, guess what? It's going to do what they say. So it's unfortunate, because once they gain foothold inside those systems, they can do things that are not necessarily detectable, like change information. It's easy enough to find out when something deletes information, but when some information of yours changes and you can no longer trust it, think about banking transactions, think about healthcare information that might get changed without your knowledge, that's when it becomes really, really tricky, because you can no longer trust those systems.
How widespread is this?
It's estimated at a few 100 million systems and devices. And that's only because it's not just limited to computers. It's also devices that run Unix, Linux. And practically anything that you can design today, anything that engineers design today and push it out to market, is considered to be great for use with Linux operating systems. Why? Because it's free. And bash is a very lightweight piece of software that interprets user commands, and it feeds them right into hardware. So it's neat, and it's free, and you can pick it up and put it on your brand new device, throw it out to market, and there it is. Makes it difficult to inventory all of these systems and all of these devices that are out there. So it can be something more complicated than just worrying about your internet-connected toaster. It could be a webcam out there that has not been patched, that maybe doesn't even know how to get patched.
Oh, there's so many vulnerabilities out there, and you've created a website for Canadians to try to absorb all of this and understand how they can protect themselves.
That's right. So bashbug.ca, incidentally, it's the same site that I set up heartbleed.ca on, because there are vulnerabilities, and I set it up simply to keep Canadians informed about the issue.
So what are the biggest concerns you hear from Canadians then who are trying to learn more about this stuff?
Well, there's a little bit of concern, because this seems like a very, very technical issue. So it's about cutting through all that technical talk. And really, as far as consumers are concerned, 3 key points. The first one is watch out for patches. If patches are available for your platform or your device, be sure to apply them. So Apple has released at least a partial patch that are command line interpreter. Let it install itself. Secondly, watch out for phishing emails. Watch out for malicious emails that might say, hey, you know what? I am from a legitimate source. Click here so we can update your toaster. Be careful with those. Only click on things you trust, erase everything else. And certainly keep your eye out on the news. I try to post the most trustworthy news on bashbug.ca, but there's going to be all sorts of news sources out there that will turn into noise, and at the end of the day, it could become a bit too much for people, so people may get desensitized like they did with Heartbleed. And yet, we still have tens of thousands of vulnerable Heartbleed servers out there, even though people are not talking about them anymore. So stay vigilant.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Claudiu, thank you very much for coming in to speak with us again.
Me.
Claudiu Popa joining us here, a cybersecurity expert.
Security experts have discovered a vulnerability in the software used in millions of Linux-based and Mac computers. Some researchers say Shellshock, also known as bash, is potentially more serious and widespread than the Heartbleed bug discovered in April. Claudiu Popa is the CEO of Informatica, a security and privacy risk advisor. We spoke earlier, and I asked him first of all to explain what bash is.
Bash is an intermediate between the usual interface that we're used to. So everything we see on the internet is clickable. It's images, it's nice looking interfaces. Beneath that, there's a translator that turns it into something that can be interpreted by a computer. And that is called a shell. And bash is a shell. Unfortunately, that shell has some security vulnerabilities, and because it's so prevalent, because it's so popular, because it's taken 22 years for it to get to this level of development, that vulnerability is everywhere. That's the problem.
Is it everywhere? Because I thought that this software bug was attacking specifically computers that run on a Linux system.
That's right. And computers that run on the Linux system are the most popular on the internet.
Right.
So the internet, Linux used to be 100%. The domain of the internet, or vice versa. And now that there's a lot of Windows machines as well, the threat is reduced. However, those Windows machines themselves depend on devices that run Linux.
So for consumers out there who are trying to figure out if their computer might be affected by this, who is safe?
The people who are safe today are the ones that use the internet as little as possible. So their computers, if they're running Apple, they need to update them, they need to patch them. If they are running a home firewall or a home router, they need to determine whether that router is impacted. And the only way to do that is to check with the vendor. Right now, there's a lot of vendors. Every vendor of every flavor of Unix has put out patches today. And those patches are available, but sometimes it takes human interaction to apply them.
All right, then we need to talk about, I guess, what happens if you don't do this. What is the potential scope of damage that could be caused by this if people don't patch their computers or businesses don't patch their computers?
Right. The reason this is such a serious bug, and it's been rated as a 10 out of 10 with the complexity of using this bug for malicious purposes rated as very low, which is a terrible combination. The reason this is terrible is because it can be exploited to penetrate a system without authorization, taking control as if the actual owner of the computer were using it, and actually modify files, modify data. Not just delete it, but modify it without the owner knowing. Taking control of devices is certainly something that is obvious. But something that's not obvious is when your files are corrupted. You may not find out for months or years.
Okay, so can you give me an example of where you would expect to see most of the damage being done? Should governments be most worried, or businesses, or consumers? I mean, I guess it depends who's using this thing.
Large companies, enterprises, governments, the ones that have the most dependencies are the ones that should be most worried, because it's not just the systems that they use, it's not the systems that they necessarily own. It could be the hosting companies that provide them with companies that they don't own, with computers that they don't own. It could be service providers whose systems they use. So for example, cloud systems, for example, websites that they go to, devices, anything that's part of the Internet of Things. Internet-connected devices like routers and firewalls and printers, things of that nature that have their own internal operating system and that manage information, those could be vulnerable.
Have we seen damage yet?
We have. There's something called an exploit. There's a bug, there's a piece of code out there that has been designed expressly to take advantage of this bug. And it's been designed in the past 24 hours. So you can imagine the speed at which these things are being developed. And so people are working around the clock on one side to protect and to patch as many systems as possible, and on the other to exploit as many systems as possible and to compromise computers by the millions.
In terms of, again, the potential scope of this one, how does it compare to the Heartbleed virus, which we talked about earlier this year? There
is some overlap with the Heartbleed indeed, because Heartbleed was, again, on the Unix platform, and it used Apache, which is an internet-facing tool. It's what hosts your websites. So that Heartbleed made it a little bit easy for those websites to be found either vulnerable or not. In this case, this is a little bit more difficult because most devices that are vulnerable sit on the other side of the firewall. So in order for any random security professional to scan the internet to determine how many or what percentage of devices is vulnerable, you have to get past those firewalls. Therefore, they have to break into a company to begin with to determine how vulnerable they are. And that's where criminals have the advantage, because in many cases, they're already inside the organization. They've already penetrated those companies and are running something called a botnet. And that botnet has already a footprint, and that can be exploited.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much. We'll let you get your call.
Thank you.
Cybersecurity experts are sounding the alarm about a new online bug that could allow hackers to wreak havoc on hundreds of millions of computer systems around the world. It's called the Shellshock bug. To tell us more, I'm joined in studio by Claudiu Popa, cybersecurity analyst and president of Informatica Corporation. Thank you for being with us. That's a tough one to say.
Thanks for having me.
This online world, we're just getting over the Heartbleed bug. Now we have this. What is it?
Well, we haven't yet gotten over the Heartbleed bug. That's the sad part. But now we have this bash bug, which is a new a new vulnerability that's plaguing the world, and it was recently discovered. In the past 24 hours, companies have been scrambling to issue patches and help vulnerable servers and systems, and the reality is that we don't really know how many devices connected to the internet are actually vulnerable to it.
Yes, because you were explaining to me it's not just your computer that could potentially be affected.
It's any device that you're connecting to, and any device that the computers that you're connecting to are connected to.
Such as?
So, well, it could be anything that's part of the Internet of Things, as it's called these days. So it could be web-connected cameras. It could be those efficient remote-controlled light bulbs. It could be
a home security system.
Home security systems, cash registers, systems used for Internet banking, transactional systems, serious stuff.
So have we seen a bug like this before? To this magnitude?
No, not this magnitude. So obviously Heartbleed comes into play as far as that magnitude, because people have talked about hundreds of millions of systems potentially impacted. And there is some overlap, because those systems did have something to do with the Unix platform. It affected Apache, a web server. In this case, it's an underlying layer between you and that web interface. There's something called a shell that accesses the computer's CPU, and it interprets what you want. And in doing so, it makes a mistake in putting a limit into how much it allows you to tell it. And that allows hackers to tell it too much.
So how do we know if we have been affected by this?
Well, that's the hard part. And that's why a lot of experts are saying that this might take years to work out of the system. Why? Because even today, as we're sitting here, there's any number of people out there who are trying to turn this vulnerability into something that propagates by itself across the internet, something that crawls its way into organizations and gains control of those systems and patches and closes the door behind it. So insofar as those attempts are successful, we're not going to know that those systems are vulnerable and have been compromised. And that's a big concern. That's not something that we want people to panic over, but it's something that is highly serious, and so it's a bit of a race against time.
All right. Thanks so much for coming in and talking to us about this today.